Welcome to the Chain Mountain Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Ackerman. In this conversation, we're joined by Sean Bolling, SVP of Operations at One Touchpoint. We discuss the intersection of branding, operations, and supply chain management, emphasizing the importance of understanding brand ethos and the systematic processes behind product creation. It's a fascinating discussion where we also touch on a broad range of other topics unique to operating in the private equity environment. So enjoy the discussion. It's a good one. Good morning, Sean. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. I think we're going to dive into some really interesting topics, and you've got a really unique take, I think, on not only operations and supply chain, but kind of how that interacts with brands and how companies kind of manage that whole component of their supply chain end to end. So really looking forward to today's discussion. But I'm gonna start off with one of my favorite interview questions. And I was asked this same question, and I was like, man, what a good question. So I started to ask people this question, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot with it, but what is your favorite brand and why?
Well, and that is a really great question. Understanding the world we live in, we're surrounded by brands all the time.
Right.
And it's in our face, whether it be through social media or regular media or what have you. But when I look at a brand, and this is maybe jumping into the why versus, prior to the identification.
Yeah. Right.
But one of the things that stands out to me from a brand perspective is, number one, obviously a good product, but it's also what I would call the systemic ethos of how that product is produced, whether it be the process or the culture or what have you. So, coming from operations, it's probably a boring answer, but I would have to say Toyota would be my favorite, simply because not only, when you talk about all of the studies showing the quality of vehicle, the quality of product and everything else is, does very well when compared to others.
Yeah.
But it's also a brand that not only means the product, but it also means the way in which the product was produced. Right. So there's an ethos to it other than the product itself. You also know the process, which gives you more confidence in the product. Right. So I think, when you talk about a brand that when it comes to catching my attention and really kind of getting me excited about it, it's something like that. I mean, I know it's not technically a brand, but, from my military days, I mean, when you hear the terms Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, those types of things, there's an evocative nature to it where, yes, you see the product. There are great men and women out there every day that are wearing a very respected uniform and everything else. But you also know the ethos and process they go through to kind of become who they are. So I've always kind of felt a connection to that, where it's, if I know something is created in a certain way by a certain type of culture and everything else, I'm more confident in the product I'm getting.
Yeah.
So that to me is probably my favorite, would be Toyota.
Great answer. And the best part of that question, I think, is the why, right? Because a lot of people will give you an interesting answer as to here's what the company name is, right? But why they believe that is really the insight into a lot of the type of person they are, right? And it's interesting to me that, Toyota, in my mind, right, I grew up in Michigan, in the 90s. And so, Toyota had, Toyota, Honda, revolutionized automotive manufacturing, during that period. And now you see all the implications. I mean, there are literally, thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of Americans trained up in, what started as TQM, right? And morphed into Six Sigma, Lean, you name it, right? But the tool set is now, commonly proliferated amongst manufacturing and goes now a lot further than obviously just the automotive world, right? So I think and so America is still the second biggest manufacturer, and obviously a lot of those manufacturing techniques have proliferated even over to China and around the world. So it's interesting to me you kind of brought that up, because that I think for a lot of manufacturing folks, that's a lot of what Toyota is, right? And the outcome of seeing Toyotas still on the road that are really, really old, and
Yep.
the resale value being so high, all of those in my mind are functions of, as you pointed out, right, the manufacturing process that they revolutionized.
Yep. Well,
The
and you
other
see
side of
other
it,
brands that kind of fall into that same sort of model of sort of,
right,
hey, the culture and process that we utilize dictates the product. I have a lot of friends that
right,
work for like Amazon and places like that where,
yeah, yeah, very
when
true,
you ask those
yeah,
guys, it's, hey, it's
yeah,
the product of being Amazonian that makes us who
that's
we
right,
are, and
yeah,
everything else. But I think just Toyota, when I look at it, has been the truest to it
right.
over time. And that's why it always kind of, it kind of hooks me when it comes to brands.
Well, the other thing, interesting thing, so I've been around the world and I lived for a while over in Africa, and of all the places I've been, right, I would put Africa up there in terms of the harshest environments where that you would drive a car in, right?
Yep.
And Toyotas you see everywhere, and probably the most, on the in the safari world, right? People who are out in the bush all day long, Toyota is kind of the standard, right? I mean, Land
Yep.
Rover had made some inroads, but you see them in that harshest environment where people need a off-road vehicle, not anything like we have really, honestly, in the US. There's off-road vehicles, but they need the durability of something that's going to last
Yep.
me 20 years and go in the bush, which is just unheard of. And then, in addition, you've got what I think in Tanzania, I love it. They call them dalas, which is basically because they cost a Tanzanian dollar to get a ride. But they're these Toyota vans, and I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, there are literally 30 people stuffed into these things, right? Hanging off the backs and
Interesting.
stuff, right? And you're just like, how these vehicles survive that type of beating is unbelievable. The other one that's proliferated in Zimbabwe in particular, and by the way, the roads in Zimbabwe are absolutely awful. They are absolutely atrocious. Is of all things Honda Fits, and
Oh,
we
wow.
over our last trip there, we counted 12 people in one Honda Fit, which seems completely unreasonable. But people sticking in the game. I mean, it was quite amazing. So goes to show you a long way. I mean, that over engineering of the vehicle, right, is pretty
Absolutely.
amazing. So great answer. Love that. Now you kind of are in an interesting industry right now, right? You work for a firm called One Touch Brands.
A
Um,
one touch point.
this the One Touch Point, sorry. And One Touch Point kind of has an interesting connection between the concept of brands, branding, but also the supply chain side, right? The manufacturing, the
Absolutely.
supply chain, and that's where you kind of live in this world, and that's kind of the unique perspective, I think. Maybe just tell us a little bit about One Touch Point, kind of what you do and how you create value for your clients.
Absolutely. So one touch point is a marketing and branding company that connects customers through a single technical platform to be able to design and market their products, their brands, and then they use that platform to manage all of the supply chain and manufacturing to get those things to where they need to be. Right. So one
Right.
of the advantages that we give to clients is through our one touch point platform. So that's the technical front end.
Mhm.
Clients can interface through that, help design quickly the type of branding they want, put some customization to it, and then manage their marketing campaigns. And we take it from there. So everything to
Yeah.
do with, whether it be fulfillment of quick turn inventory that you want to be able to provide to clients quickly for marketing purposes,
Hmm.
whether it's managing your campaigns in terms of, laying on supply chain for apparel and, promotional materials and things like that, or, just general print capability. All of that can be managed through one platform. You don't have to go to 5 different people to get all this stuff. So
Right.
um, you can through this platform design initiate and fulfill your entire marketing campaign through one company instead of having to go to four to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's really cool concept. And I think, we'll talk a little bit more about the context and where we think that's going to go, kind of in the future, right? I mean, obviously, branding, marketing, certainly print media has been, disrupted, certainly over the
Absolutely.
last 20 years, right? And so this is changing and evolving quickly. But that kind of, to the name says it all, right? The one touch point, kind of is a, the first that I've seen of that kind of omni capability to be able to do all of those end to end, right? So very cool.
Absolutely. It's exciting for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one touch point is owned, I think, by a private equity firm, right?
Yes. Yes. PE
And
group.
that's yeah, and that's a little bit of a different model. We talk about that frequently on our podcast. I do a lot of work for private equity portcos and have worked in them as well. And I've found some substantial differences in terms of kind of how these firms are run, pros and cons, right? As
Absolutely.
to, the market. But, you know, in general, right, it is the fastest growing ownership model. So if you just kind of say in general, there's public equity, then there's private equity. Private equity has basically doubled in terms of the count of businesses. Now, the overall
Absolutely.
market cap, public is much bigger, right? But from a count of businesses, especially within the US, obviously private equity is the dominant the dominant form.
Yeah.
Um, talk to me a little bit about, your experience, working in the two different models and from your experience, right? Pros, cons.
Sure.
What does it take to be successful, right?
Yeah. So, like you said, I mean, it's perfect analogy. I mean, there's pros and cons to any model you work in, right? Like there
Right.
is no. I've had this question because I've had the opportunity to work in, the privately owned, publicly
Mhm.
held, PE backed. All of those environments provide their own advantages and disadvantages. You just have to understand how to work with each. So when you talk about the difference between sort of that, public versus private equity world, you
Right.
know, a lot of your publicly traded companies, when you talk about operating within that model, when you're trying to appeal for things that you're wanting to do or things you're wanting to enact, it really has to go down two tracks. It's the sort of immediate value add, whether it be for profitability or capability. So if you're trying to increase speed or something like that,
Hmm.
you have to cater to that, but you also have to a degree, cater to longer term longevity because the publicly traded world wants to see not only growth but consistent over time, consistent growth,
Right.
right? So if you're
Right.
going into a major disruptive type of sphere that hasn't proved itself yet, right? So a
Hmm.
new technology, a new way of doing things. It's a little harder actually in a publicly traded company to really go all in on it because it hasn't proved itself yet and they're really interested over in growth over time, where in the PE backed world it's actually an interesting dynamic because they have, the same sort of capital advantage where they'll invest in you to do this stuff,
Hmm.
but they're really more concerned about that game changing value add that they can then market for the future sale when they're ready to sell it. And they're not looking to hang
Right.
on to it for 20 years normally. They're looking to build it up over a 3 to 5 year time frame and then sell it off. So you have a lot more, I'll say, understanding ears for a lot of disruptive type of technology or methodology. In a PE backed, it's a little easier to justify because as long as you can show the returns financially and how it's going to benefit them from the sale of the company when they're ready,
Right.
you can actually get a lot more done quicker in that environment with a lot less justification other than the financials. Whereas in a publicly traded company, you really got to thread the needle of, and I know what you're trying to do, but this hasn't proven itself yet. What if it doesn't work?
Right.
Are you
Right.
are you about to
Yeah.
tank the company? Because we're looking for 20 years of planning here. We're not looking for three. right? So it is both, uh, both environments take a little bit of finesse in terms of operating in them, but as long as you know what the end game is for either one and you can actually cater to that, they both have advantages, right? So
Right.
like I said, for PE, it's probably a lot more of a friendly environment for groups that are really looking to uh, go really early adoption of disruptive technologies and disruptive methodologies that are not exactly like household names yet,
Right.
where it's less likely that you're going to be able to do that unfettered in a publicly traded company because they're not convinced yet because they haven't seen the evidence on the street,
Right.
right?
Right.
You know, the PE backed are a little bit more, I don't want to say it's not gambling per se, but they're a little bit more free willed or free spirited about, you know, investing in things that haven't necessarily been proven on the street yet because they want to be the first,
Right.
so that they can sell the company at a better,
Yeah.
you know, a much higher price because of that value added they invested in.
The risk tolerance is there, right? Assuming they're in
Absolutely.
a good, capital position, they do some
Yep.
financial engineering to get themselves in that, and
Yeah.
then they're willing to take the risk. I think
Well,
one
and think of
interesting
yourself
thing,
in the seat of a shareholder, right? If I'm a
right,
shareholder in a public company, I'm looking for consistent long term returns.
right,
I'm not looking for, and, you know, necessarily a, hey, really go all in so we can sell this off so I get one big return. Whereas PE is much more on that side where, hey, look, we really want to add value quickly so that we can get a big return when we sell this off.
that's right,
So as an ops guy, kind of taking it down to advantages and disadvantages, if as an operations guy, if I'm really big on new technology, new methodology that hasn't exactly seeded yet in the market,
hmm,
PE is the way to go because they'll back you a little bit more willingly,
right,
than a group that's really looking out for that long-term reputation and performance of the company because the risk is high.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
the tolerance is a little lower when they're looking for that longevity.
I think there's a couple threads I'd like to pull here in this conversation. So, number one, um, the fact that they're willing to change and they're if you can sell them on that change, right, that they're going
Yep.
to say let's go with it. The implications are that oftentimes you've got to take an organization that, if they're new to private equity, sometimes they just that change and moving that quickly is very difficult, right? So puts a
Yes.
lot of the onus on positions like yourself to not only be able to say, hey, here's a change and this is the return on it, let's go,
Yep.
but now you've got to sell that change within the organization and actually enact it, right? And
Yes.
there's a DNA associated with that, right? So that's one
Absolutely.
of them. And then the other one is of DNA. I think a lot of folks, who are kind of coming up in our profession, right? They're looking at, operations folks, and they're I wouldn't say they have blinders on, but they're learning about the other parts of the business and how things work.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is really fascinating is that people don't appreciate the ability for a operations person to actually be able to do the sizing and ROI calculation. Like, how do I actually
Yeah.
calculate this potential value, right? And how do I model that and be able to say, here's the upside, here's where I think we're going to hit, and then here's the low side, right? And be
Yep.
able to measure that risk and understand and calculate that. And I think that's
Yep.
the financial component of it is not necessarily something that's often taught in your typical operations classes, but
Very true.
operational accounting is a really important class in general, right? It's an important
Absolutely.
skill, right? So let's pull at the first thread, which is, how do you manage an organization that's not used to changing that fast? How do you
Yep.
get them comfortable with being uncomfortable? I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it kind of comes back to the idea of it's all about communicating what you're trying to do. For the PE audience that you're trying to appeal to, what you're trying to articulate is, hey, by doing this thing or investing in this technology, here's what it's going to do financially from a immediate return, so whether that be efficiency or increased profitability through less cost to produce more, what have you, that's what it's going to get you. And then in terms of capability that you can then market when you're looking to sell the company to the next person, here is how you can do that. That's one message. When you turn back to your organization, I've learned, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work in a very diverse set of fields. So I've worked in diverse industries, diverse types of manufacturing. What I have found is all of them are fundamentally the same. All of the problems are the same. All of the concerns are the same. All the, I'll call it, cultural needs to make them work well are the same. They just manifest a little differently depending on what industry you're in, right?
Yeah.
So when you're turning back to your organization, I always like to tell people there's three components that on the people side are needed to make an organization work well. It's vision. You got to know what you're trying to do and how everybody contributes and articulate that so everybody understands. You have to have the systems and processes that support achieving that vision. So if you're going to tell them what you're trying to do and how they contribute, you got to put them in position to win by giving them a system and processes that will allow that to occur. Mm-hmm. And then you have what I call the culture that is going to support achieving that vision with those systems. So depending on what type of business you're running or what type of venture that you're leading, the behaviors needed to do it well might be a little different. You might need a culture of innovation. You might need a culture of, consistent compliance if you're in the medical device industry or what have you. You might need a culture of resilience if you're in more of an entrepreneurial, you're going to take gut punches, you got to build a culture that is resilient to that. But once you have the vision and the systems, you have to model the leadership culture of those behaviors that you identify are critical to doing those things. Mm-hmm. So it earns the right to take hold as the base culture for the rest of the team, right? If they don't see it from you, it never will. Right. It'll just be something you're demanding that you're not doing yourself and the team doesn't take it on as their personality. So when I return to my organization, it all comes back to, yes, big disruption. And we're going a real big different direction that you guys are used to doing. But remember what we're trying to do.
Right.
This is how that change supports that vision. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's how it's going to change the systems we got to use to make that vision happen. Right. We're used to doing it this way. If we're switching to this technology or that, integrating that artificial intelligence or what have you, it's going to change our processes a little bit. But here's how it's going to change them.
Right.
And then we still, as a group, these are the behaviors we need to show in spades every single day. Right. And all those things, those three components still work together, even though we're changing. Right. The way I used to put it to a team I had years ago when I was running a thermoset plastics plant was, we were undergoing a lot of technology upgrades that made some of our old manual processes no longer necessary. And I had a lot of folks that had been doing it a long time, and they were very proud of those processes. And what I used to tell them is, who here knows the company Sony? You can just have them raise their hand, show of hands type thing. And I was like, all right, how many people work out in the morning before they come to work? And, more people raise their hands. I'm like, okay, so when you got up this morning, did you get your Sony Walkman, pop open the cassette player, and slap in the cassette and just get going with your little foam headphones? And everybody just giggles a little bit. I'm like, Sony didn't keep doing it that way. That's why they still exist. All of the stuff you use today, with back then it was MP3 players and stuff. I know things continue to advance, but I'm like, do you know if they would have not changed to do that, where would they be? They're like out of business. I'm like, exactly. So what we're doing is the same thing. We're just doing it in a different way because we kind of have to, the way technology is going forward. So it's all about how you relate what you're doing change-wise to what your mission is, to make sure that it's congruent, that they can see that, right? And that the systems in which you are achieving that vision will still be accommodated with this technology, and that our culture is still the same, right? It's still the same way we operate from a personal behavior / values driven standpoint. Nothing's changed other than the method.
Right. Where did you learn how to sell the change, right? How to sell that up and be able to say, hey, I think we could do this differently. You know, can you give me some capital to go make it happen, right? Where
Yeah.
did you learn the financial analysis required to do that, right?
Well, when I started off, I started in the military, and obviously you're dealing with, in the officer corps, you're dealing a lot with logistics and budgets and things like that. Now, you're not necessarily justifying. It's more of a manner of um, understanding where money goes and sort of the financial implications of what you're doing in a military unit and what that stuff
Right.
costs and all that type of
Hmm.
thing. So when I came out and got into manufacturing, I started as a production supervisor, and I didn't have the what I would call maybe the justification skills, but I understood the cost structures of things. So I understood,
Right.
coming into manufacturing, how your overhead um, translated into cost, so that I could account for it. But the first thing I did was I literally, and I've done this every single job I've changed to ever since. My first controller at a plant level, I attached to their hip on day one and really gave them, I give the same speech everywhere I go or some derivative thereof. I am too dumb to do your job. I need you to take all of this financial leakage and I need you to put it into physical space so I can do something about it. Right. So if I have an absorption problem in manufacturing, I'm too rock headed to understand that, man. So what do you mean? Where is the leakage? Where is that absorption in the value stream going? And I started learning from them the physics of it all. And then I would ask them, okay, so if I'm looking to invest in fixing that leak, what's the language I need to speak to do that? And
Yeah.
then they would tell me, well, you got to give an actual ROI on how many years it's going to take for it to pay for itself. And you go through all the machinations. Every company has its own little template for capital requests and everything else that does different calculations. But
Right.
essentially, it is that capital return on investment and really understanding the language and components that go into that analysis. So once I started learning that, still not perfect at it, but you got to be able, if you're in operations and you're trying to get something done, the language of operations is viable in only one place, the shop floor,
Right.
right? They understand it all day long and they will operate by it. If you're trying to get somebody else to help you, you got to expand your Rosetta Stone a little bit. And finance is the number one universal language to get anything approved, whether it be working with supply chain, where I can say, hey, look, buddy, I know you're evaluated on piece price. I can save you some
Right.
by doing XYZ. I know, engineering guy, you are measured on, average run size, which dictates your price that you then communicate up to commercial. I can tell you how we can increase our average run quantity, but here's what you got to do, right? So it's
Right.
understanding those language barriers between functions and how they communicate. But financials are universal. They kind of translate into everything in business. So if you
Right.
learn that financial language, the best advice I can give to any ops guy or gal out there, whenever you get into an ops role, connect with your finance person immediately
Right.
and have them talk to you like you're a 2-year-old for a while until you
Right.
start getting going. I had the base of understanding cost, but I didn't understand how to translate it into a pitch.
So
Where
yeah.
finance people, they're the ones that approve pitches. They can coach you all day long.
Yeah.
So
On the job training then for you, right?
absolutely.
That's where we're able to learn a lot of that, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to shift our conversation a little bit. When we had talked previously, you made a couple statements, right? AI won't replace human interaction, right? Um, could you give me an example kind of what you mean by that statement? Where you've seen it help human judgment, but where that human interaction is still critical, and kind of how do
Yep.
you balance that interaction, how automation and AI and making sure that you
Yeah.
keep the human touch, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great question and a great discussion topic because whether you're talking about automation or AI, it's literally an exercise in balance because they are undeniably good things when used in the right place for the right purpose. What I mean by that is like, coming back to your AI question, I made the statement about the human touch side of it because what AI what AI provides you is quick access to static data. Like if you're looking to do data analytics on static metrics, AI
Right.
is going to be a game changer for the way that we utilize analysts.
Right.
But it only does one half of the job, right? Analysis is two stages. It's the data mining, and then the what the hell does this data mean? What do I do with this?
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, and I know Elon Musk and Peter Thiel will disagree with me here, but nobody's smart enough to write an algorithm that will be applicable in every single scenario based on what you're dealing with currently in the moment, whether it be, the type of customer that you're idiosyncrasy that you're dealing with. They're very sensitive
Right.
about this, but not that. AI will not tell you that. A human being has to make that determination. Like, no, I know what the data says, but if we just do that, here's what you're going to hear from your customer that's going to receive the result of what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with automation. Like, as an ops guy, I've both heard preached and preached automation multiple times in my career. But automation is not an end in itself. It's kind of like lean. Just by doing the tools doesn't make you better as a company. It's a toolkit to do what you were already trying to do, right? So when you look at automation, same conversation as AI. You got to be very thoughtful about what you're automating, just to make sure that it is, number one, it's repetitive. It happens all the time, right? If it only happens once in a while, why in the world would you automate it, right? It doesn't, there's no reason for it. It's a waste of money on automation. But it's got to be, repetitive, and it's got to be something that does not require decisions, right? So it's got to be something that is just algorithmic. It can just flow without somebody making a decision.
Right.
Right.
You have,
So
you have agentic AI now, which you are providing some level of agency to be able to say, hey, here's a decision. But I think what you're pointing out is that within that, you have to provide it parameters and a decision tree to be able to provide it the agency at the end of the day.
As conditions change on the ground, that decision tree changes. And that's where that's why I say, you would have to create, and I'm not saying that this can't happen or whatever. I'm not smart enough on technology. But the amount of, I guess, decision trees or algorithms in the background that you would have to come up with to determine every eventuality that a human being would see with their own eyes is a tall order. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's a very tall order. But here's the second part of it, Hank, that I think it's important and people forget, because I've seen it in automation and it could be almost double for AI. One of the problems with automation is in our zeal to do it, usually the benefit is, hey, I need less cost to do certain work, whether that be labor cost or what have you. And usually when you automate something, you either eliminate the personnel that were doing it. So, the people that were doing it every day would no longer be there, or you would redeploy them someplace else where they could better spend their time. Mm-hmm. But our big tendency is to forget the knowledge of how the process works that we automated. So stop me, anybody in manufacturing, if you've heard this before, the machine goes down.
Yeah.
What happens is you are now beholden. You don't know how to do it anymore. So you are now dead in the water. You're beholden to the automation rather than being enhanced by it. Right. Mm. So you need to balance that. Yes, I'm automating this process, but I'm also maintaining the capability and the knowledge so that if it goes down, I can still perform the task and get product out or provide the service or whatever it is I'm doing. The other part of it is when we lose track or we lose that knowledge, that touch on what we automated, we also lose the parts of the process that we know there are quality faults in. So we don't know to look for them anymore.
Right.
We know that within this automated process, when I used to do this manually, if you didn't do this exactly right, you get this problem or this defect or what have you. Once you automate it, and we're all guilty of this, we just assume it's right when it comes out because we don't look for it anymore. It's like turning on Google Maps when you get in your car to go to a place you haven't been before. Yeah. You just blindly assume it's going to take you there. Now, it usually does. I use it all the time. Yeah. But there's the danger that now that you're complacent and you're not looking for it anymore because you don't understand the process fault points. Right. you're increasing your error rates. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, it is something very similar, which is, okay, I got these data analytics, it spat them out at me. But I forgot what reports these come from. I forgot what processes followed to get this data. So if there's a fault in it, I don't see it anymore. I just accept at face value what's being given to me.
Right.
So you do need to balance. Even if you go with AI for analytics, you have to understand still, maintain the knowledge of the process that automation is going through to get what it's getting. Otherwise, you run the risk of, okay, yeah, no, it gave me a bunch of data. Awesome. Well, yeah, but remember, the report it's drawing off of only comes out once every quarter, and it's the second month, and there's no report out yet. So it's going off an old report. So what you're getting is not real-time data. So it might be wrong now. But if we don't know that, we're, oh, look, AI right there, spat it out. That's the automated new magical solution. Let's go with this data. That's why I say the human touch is always needed, because it's that, not to go all Skynet or anything. I mean, I'm just hoping this stuff doesn't become sentient or anything, but you need that human being to take that data and say, okay, that doesn't seem to make sense, but I know where that data comes from, and I think I know why. Let's hold off on acting on that data.
Yeah.
Because, the quarterly report isn't out yet. It's drawing off the last quarter, and we know a major shift has happened. So before we go crazy.
Yeah. And I think we both know, I had a recent conversation with a guy who does a lot of work in, with SAP and ERPs, and, data came up and the quality of data. And I think there was a statistic that, 14% of companies don't trust their data, right? So if that's, one of the critical components that you're relying on, and you don't ultimately trust the data that underlies it, right? How do you trust the decisions that it's suggesting for you? And I think
you've just made made the ability of making bad decisions quicker.
Right. Now, if you look back, I think we'll go back to the TQM world, right? Automation in automotive was increasing as well, right?
Yep.
I'm moving from, a lot of very manual stamping processes, and I'm putting in robots, and now I'm automating a lot of this. There was a marriage between the TQM fundamentals, of Six Sigma and SPC and activities like that. Do you see that same kind of maturation of, yes, we're automating, but we're also coming up with ways to ensure that what we're automating does provide the same quality of output, right, on the same level of consistency.
Absolutely.
But maybe we're just not trained in the usage of those measurement tools like we are with TQM or Lean or any of those, right?
Well, and when you look at that, and that's a great point, because there was that marriage, and it particularly, and kind of coming back to Toyota, when you look at the TPS system, one of the big, sort of emphasis points that's always brought up is that they are all for automation. But the purpose of automation in their view, and I can't remember, I think this is from Taiichi Ohno's book, The Toyota Production System, he said that, yes, automation, absolutely, but automation as an extension of the operator, not a replacement. It is an extension of what the operator does to do things quicker, more efficiently, so the operator can do more, versus the idea of we're replacing the operator's intelligence and implanting it into the automation that we're putting in, because it's just, in his words, and I agree, impossible to do, right? Because it doesn't have that cognitive ability to see when conditions are wrong, to act quickly enough. Now again, to be able to do what we do in manufacturing anywhere, it's been proven to get the reach that we have today and get products in the hands of as many people as we do, you need automation.
Right.
And I think in the AI world, what's so exciting about it is the idea of all of this arduous work to get enough data to make decisions is going to go into hyperspeed, right? But it's still going to require that, okay, now I have all this data, what's the decision? It's never going to be, and or in my view, it shouldn't be. All right, I am the AI module. I've given you all the data. Now here's the decision you're going to make based on this data. The relationship should always be okay, because if I'm a CEO of a company, I am looking at this data that AI has provided for me at lightning speed, which used to take me months to get.
Right.
But I can then apply that to my knowledge of my shareholders, the future of my business, where we're trying to go, the people that work for me and their
Right.
interests and needs and all that type of stuff. And okay, now I can make that quality decision a lot faster.
Yeah.
It doesn't replace the need to make that quality decision.
Right. Right. You had also said in a conversation, kind of, we automated it. Now what? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, once a company has moved, its brand management, its fulfillment, its marketing process, and you started to automate that, what do you feel are the next frontiers, right? Where
Yeah.
do you think is the next um the next kind of opportunity, and then what are the hardest parts to get right after just automating?
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of coming back to the automation of simple tasks, it's sort of a principle that applies to automation in general. Is there's a tendency on our part to think, okay, we've automated, now we're good, we don't have to worry about that anymore. To your point, perfect question, what's next? So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Where do we focus our people's time and energy so that we're moving forward in the right direction? And my argument has always been, and I didn't put it exactly like, now what, but my argument has always been, when we're looking to automate, whether it be multiple steps of a process or a single step of the process, if it was under, my bailiwick to manage, what I always used to ask is, okay, great. So we're automating the use of a person's time. Where are we redirecting them now that they have more time? What is that? We took the simple task away because we automated it, and it was the right decision. We all went through that thoughtful process to identify that automation opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What we often fail to do is say, okay, great. Now where do I redeploy that person to move me forward? Right. So if we look at, like, in a manufacturing process, if you have like an auto assembly type of a thing where you're putting things together manually, and you automate it to where a collaborative robot or something is putting it together rather than a person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we've now gotten faster at assembling. How does that help us grow our business? Is that a shorter lead time overall? If not, what do we need to refocus everybody on to make that happen? So it kind of comes back to the question, I hate to bring it back there, is when you're automating, why are you automating? What is it in aid of? What are you trying to do? I understand labor cost and reduce cost and price and everything else. But if you are trying to automate for some game-changing business reason, what is the output of that reason? Is it more throughput through your factory?
Right.
Is it shorter lead times from quote to cash in terms of a customer wanting something and then having it in their hands? If I automate one portion of this whole process, how do I refocus everybody else to get that thing that we said it was going to get us?
Right.
So, that's why I always caution, plant managers and such that I've coached in the past. When you're looking at automation, understand that it is a great tool. It's also an awesome opportunity for sub-optimization within your factory. So if I've automated a process at the beginning and I can do it 50 times faster, and the next step in the value stream now can't keep up with what I just did.
Right.
How much more goes off the back dock every day because I just did what I did? Oh, nothing. Cool. What did we just do?
Yeah.
Right. So when you look at sort of that next frontier of opportunity, when you automate, whether it be through, data analytics or physical processes, I think that needs to be the question right away is, when you talk about automation, don't just look at what it's going to save you in that moment. What is that now going to free up that you can now build towards, whether it's hey, look, we want to now take this guy who was data analyzing, and then I want to figure out how to do web design to where customers can customize what they want, immediately versus having to send stuff to us for us to then brainstorm and come back to them. Right. I couldn't do that before without hiring people. Now I have somebody I can just move from what I just automated.
Yeah. That's, that's where I think, like, Eli Goldratt theory of constraints comes in, right? And as you're building the business case to say, hey, I think we should automate this one process. Where am I moving the bottleneck, right? Where is Herbie
Absolutely.
now?
Where did my Herbie go?
Yeah,
Yep.
where is he? Um, one of the interesting things that I think is associated with that, and one of the, potential reasons why you'd say, okay, this is a place where I need to automate or look for opportunity to automate, or be more on the proactive side of being able to say, what are the things that really differentiate me amongst my customer, and what's
Yep.
going to provide me a competitive advantage. And if I take that and I say, you know what, I need to be able to create that value. A lot of this is based obviously on coming up with and measuring the correct metrics, right?
Yes.
And so if you think about, which metrics to track, which ones to ignore, which ones to spend your time on, which ones
Yep.
to develop and be, able to measure. How do you wrap your head around and the context, and how do you help those people make better decisions, not just
Yeah.
chasing your typical vanity, I would say your typical vanity metrics, but there are a lot of high level metrics, which in my mind
Absolutely.
are, kind of too high level. They may be a, quote unquote KPI. They give
Yep.
you a general idea of the direction you're going, but it's not necessarily a usable metric for the operations to be able to say, this is kind of a RCA, root cause analysis type of metric to help me
Yeah.
understand when my process is failing.
Yeah. No, and that's great. And that's something that, when I look around in the operational roles that I've been a part of in the organizations I've been a part of, that's always been a challenge, because one of the things, that I learned early on that I try to preach to anybody that'll listen is, when you talk about metrics, part of your job as a leader is whatever level you're at, you're a translator, right? So whatever the high level company metric is, where, hey, we want to track, your standard safety, quality, delivery, cost type stuff, right? I want zero recordables. I want,
Right.
scrap rate or external PPM of X. I want, EBITDA of Y under cost, and all this other stuff. That's all good. And those are all barometers. The step we often fail to take is, at each level you drop, that metric changes in some way. So what I mean by that is, if I'm a plant manager
Yeah.
and I'm telling a group that we need to improve quality, and I want an external PPM drop of this. Well, if I have 27 machining cells and I then just plaster that metric everywhere, if I'm that machinist, what does that mean to me? What's my share of the task to actually achieve this thing that you're doing, that you're asking of me, rather? And oftentimes we just say, well, I want 98% on-time delivery. That's what I want. Well, awesome. As an overall plant, that's a great thing to measure. But if you don't take the opportunity to translate that down to what that means for each area that services that final metric,
Yeah.
you never, it's all noise, no signal, right? So
Right.
if I'm a machining cell operator in a overall factory, you come to me and say, hey, we had a terrible on-time delivery day yesterday. What does that mean to me? Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I look at my production sheet, I might have had the best day I've had in 6 months. And it's not translating to a result, because I don't control the rest of the path down the value stream, right?
Right.
So, if I measured schedule attainment, and I said, in
Yeah.
this machining cell, we were supposed to complete these orders, did we or didn't we? He understands that, because I either got it done or I didn't.
Right.
But
Right.
it's not even at a macro level. Number one, at a macro level, you got to make sure that you're just measuring the critical few things. Don't try to get a research grant measuring KPIs.
Yeah.
Like I keep telling people, the phenomenon of, wouldn't it be cool to track, or wouldn't it be
Yeah.
cool to know?
Yeah.
You're wasting your time, and everything turns into noise. Signal is, you can't see the forest for the trees. That's why I always kind of laugh at daily management boards when I walk around plants, because I know who uses them and who doesn't.
Yeah.
If I see an elaborate 75 paper slide thing up there, I'm like, that's awesome. Nobody does anything with
Nah.
it, right? If I see a guy or a cell tracking 3 things, I'm like, okay, they probably know what they're doing. Let me ask about these 3 things.
Right.
So you start with those critical few and you narrow them down, and then you translate them as you go down to how everybody actually contributes at their level every day to achieving that. Because if you don't, it gives you false positives and false negatives every day,
Right.
which turns into complete lack of meaning. And then your organization doesn't know what to think of their KPIs.
So is 3 things your magic number? 3 things? Is that for a sell?
If you're over 5,
Okay.
it's not going to be maintained.
Yeah.
And it turns into like the number
I can
one
see
question
that.
I ask
Yeah.
every supervisor or anybody at the lowest level or highest level whenever I read data, whether it be at a plant board, a division board, or a shop floor cell, is I see all this information. What do we do with it every day? Well, I mean, nothing really. I mean, we track it. Well, okay, then you're wasting your time. This is not, we're not trying to, again, and I use it as a one-liner a lot, we're not trying to get a research grant from this. We're trying to take action.
Right.
So if I'm seeing this and I'm not taking any action, stop tracking it right now and track something you can act on. And that's the test. But yes, to your point, 5 is the max. I understand what many of the books say, but the books are not overlays; they're philosophies, right? So don't try to overlay Toyota's thing on you. If you can track 2 things and it's actioned every day, do that.
Yeah. There is evidence that threes and fives are powerful numbers for the human brain, right? That we can't
Absolutely.
Oftentimes conceptualize much more than that. So building upon that, what's your most interesting metric that you guys measure, right? Something that's not your typical, but give me an example of kind of the one that you are kind of like, this metric is cool because it's really unique to what we do, and it's something that we pay attention to, and it's effective in driving,
Yep.
in customer satisfaction or efficiency or something along those lines.
Absolutely. And I don't know if it's unique to us, but it's something that I think we've dialed into and refined down to pretty well, more than other places I've been. When I first got to this company, I tried to take a different approach to KPIs because they had measurements. Stop me if you've heard this one. They've had consultants in that came up with metrics for them to measure and everything else. And they were measuring them. They just didn't tell them anything. And they weren't doing anything as a result. But, what I tried to do was introduce the concept of just asking the question to the team, guys, what are your derailers every day? What is it that takes you off of what you're doing?
Right.
And, puts you in a place where you're getting behind. And they came up with, the major one was literally just break-ins.
Yeah.
Just break-ins to the schedule. And that, as we continued the questioning, kind of turned into their perceived root of all evil. I'm like, okay, great. So from now on, that's all we're tracking. I just want to know how many break-ins to the schedule we're doing every day.
Right.
And from there, we were able to take that and say, okay, why are we breaking into the schedule 32 times? Number one, nobody was tracking it, so nobody realized it was that prevalent.
Right.
But then I could talk to my colleagues in customer service and sales and everything else and say, okay, guys, understand every time you break in, it is an average of 45 minutes impact per break-in.
Right.
If I translate that down into the labor, machine, and overhead cost of each break-in, it is X amount of dollars. Do you realize by that logic, we wasted $75,000 last month on break-ins alone?
Yeah.
Because of the disruption they cause. And they just had no idea. And from there, we started looking at, okay, why do we break in so much? And then we started looking at things like order management and standard lead time rules and all that type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, we were breaking in a little less and everything started to flow. But it was this idea of, we tried to barrage them with 50 metrics to track. The consultants did.
Right.
Where instead of that, flip the script. Guys, what do you think is biting you?
Right.
Okay, well, let's track that.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you prove it wrong, right? Like, I heard this was happening. Now I'm seeing it doesn't happen but once every 6 weeks. You got to pick another bane of your existence, guys, for us to track. And we can then start going that way. So instead of going by the theoretical book answer of what you should be tracking, it should start with asking, okay, what do we think are the most impactful things that hurt us every day? Okay, great. Track that. Or the things that must be done on a daily basis that dictate success or failure.
Right.
Going more down that logic versus the presupposed, all right, we're going to do safety, quality, delivery, cost, inventory, like
Right.
all the book answers. Like I've told people, factories are not academic exercise; they're cultural, right?
Right.
You have to understand what you're trying to do, and all factories from a process standpoint are different because you have different people, different equipment, different customer concerns, and different everything else. They're the same in that it's processes, but they differ in the fact that what drives them is unique.
Yeah.
So don't try to cookie cutter it by just reading the Toyota way and thinking you can slap up what they tracked, because that's a
Yeah.
mistake a lot of us make. I did early on.
Well, especially in automotive. I mean, I think one of the things I spend a lot of time working, with clients and their ERPs and customer service and sales and around that kind of I'll call it the golden moment when you make a promise to a customer and then obviously you deliver it, right?
Yep.
And that first golden moment, customers or many of my clients tend to get that wrong. And to your point, right, when you really begin to say, all right, schedule break-ins are a huge cost to us, you begin to pull upstream and you realize, well, we make ridiculous promises to customers all the time, right? And
Absolutely.
we've got to do better at understanding our lead times
Yeah.
and putting in rush order charges and rush order flags and having rules around that. And that's where
Absolutely.
a lot of clients break down and maybe they had rules, but they got away from them and they stopped enforcing them. Or, you've
Yeah.
got, cavalier salespeople coming in and making promises and then you got to back them up. So I think that continuity now between all the way from what a salesperson is promising and the lead times that you create all the way
Yep.
through to the manufacturing floor is so important, right? I think
Yeah.
oftentimes you begin to think about operations as just being hey, you need to just do efficient operations over here. That whole
Yeah.
thing needs to work in concert beautifully and be organized.
Absolutely.
And
It needs to be
the data
symbiotic,
all need to be.
because
Yes.
if it's not that mutually supportive system, it just turns into a series of inefficient, over the wall tosses.
Right.
And one of the things that I always tell my my comrades upstream is always, when we talk about things like lead times and improving that and whatever, I always tell them, like, look, remember, in many cases you jump to conclusions about this stuff. You remember, your shop floor is what it is.
Right.
The diet you give it in terms of how you feed it dictates what comes out of it every day and how efficiently and everything else. If you're feeding it Twinkies, it's going to give you a terrible output, right? I need more broccoli. I need less, more broccoli, less chocolate, guys.
Whatever
Like,
it is that's in a Twinkie. Yeah.
Whatever substance that is. But
Right.
It's one of those things, to your point, it's got to be connected, and you have to understand from beginning to end, from quote to cash. That's why I love value stream mapping so much.
Yeah, great tool.
And
yeah.
I always add an element because, I add what I call the second heartbeat, which is that from the customer, usually what happens in a value stream map is you have this picture and it's got the customer, and then it goes right to the factory and all the lead times and all this other stuff. And I like to draw a second line that says, okay, customer, order entry, engineering, all this other stuff that goes before the shop floor order is released. What's your cycle time? What is the expectation around lead time?
Right.
I can tell you what it is in fabrication. It's supposed to be 62 seconds per whatever. That's what we calculated. What is it for engineering? Oh, Sean, it could take 2 weeks. Okay, great. So my lead time's got to be 2 weeks and 1 minute then, right? Like, it can't be 1 minute.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. It's like Groundhog Day. I think the VSM's incredibly important and valuable tool to your point. I think this also fits into, my next question. And we had a conversation about kind of managing up with leaders, managing sideways, the cross-functional.
Yep.
And I think this fits into the managing sideways, right? Which is,
Yep.
Because, modern supply chains are so integrated. Oftentimes you're in silos and you
Yep.
have, as you said, different comrades in different parts of the business that you need to be coordinated with, right? And
Absolutely.
there's a continuity that is required, a culture within the team, but also a continuity and a culture across those functional silos.
Absolutely.
Just tell me a bit about you, kind of your philosophy there. Any kind of unique experiences or tricks that you might suggest
Yeah.
to a younger person in terms of how to create that continuity? Because I think in many businesses, it's very this, right? It's
Oh
like,
yes.
it's very divisive American politics, right? Operations and sales are
100%.
diametrically opposed, right? Blame them
Yep.
for everything.
Yeah. No, and that's a great, really great point, because I think it's something that is underemphasized in organizations. And it kind of comes back, like at a macro level, it comes back to that idea of making sure everybody understands that vision and the systems that support it and the culture we're asking everybody to kind of operate under, right? What are those behaviors like, whatever. But so, because if everybody knows that, they would know, okay, the next guy down the line is going to be killed by what I just did, right? It's not going to do the overall mission. My process is not conducive to the vision type thing. But one of the things that, a lot of people suffer from, to your point, we're humans, man. We get siloed by our interest groups, right? So if I'm in operations, of course, I tell everybody in every conversation, please make sure you understand I come from an ops bias. Check me. If I am overstepping or overstating or oversimplifying and not taking your function into account, please let me know, because I might do that unconsciously. But what I've tried to coach people on is to avoid, in operations, I used to call it the ops guy gene when I was younger, right? It was this idea that, in operations, sometimes we pride ourselves on the idea of, I'm going to get this done in spite of all that stuff upstream. We're going to make this happen. We're going to get it out the door, all that stuff. It's just that culture can be there if you feed it. And what I learned, because I used to be a purveyor of that culture when I first started in manufacturing, I was younger and a little less mature. But what I came to understand is, yeah, upstream never gets to hear that we're suffering. We just resent them silently and get the stuff out the door, taking individual pride on the fact that we did it, which is actually not helping anybody.
Right.
What I used to tell my teams is like, guys, what did we just do? We just made sure that this is going to happen every time this type of order comes down the pike. I got it. We got it out this time. We have to take these issues to the various places where we think the process is failing. And what I did, sideways to your point as a plant manager, was number one, I would get to know all of my functional partners, the leaders of those teams, just to, make sure that we knew each other. I would give them kind of what I look for out of that department. I would ask the same out of what they're looking for operations. How can I do that? What are the big bugaboos you found in operations before? How can I help with that? And oftentimes what we found was instances of, no, I could help with that. However, I need something from you. Every time you put an order in like this, if you don't flag this field in the system, I don't see it. And you never flag it. Oh, I didn't know I wasn't flagging that. So it kind of setting that expectation early of, number one, getting to know everybody, making sure they understand what you need from them, and ask what they need from you, because they need something. At the end of the day, what I always like to say about operations, we're the end of the line. That's why we always get the blame, is because whether it ships or not is not on the sales guy. It's on the ops guy. Right. If that order ever had a fight and prayer to ship on time, might fall on the sales guy. But at the end of the day, he just wants that order to ship. He'll be open usually to hey, look, I need you. If you want this on time, here's what I need from you to make that happen. Right. And just kind of having that, it's never a single conversation, because a million things come up, but you got to keep having it every time it comes up, not get cynical. Oh, it's never going to change. Oh, this happened again, whatever. Every time you got to be relentless on. I found this again, guys. Remember, we talked about, if this happens, it really does jeopardize our ability to do this. And it in my experience, what I found is there's very few people that after the third or fourth time is going to tell you, yeah, no, I just don't want to fix that. They usually will say, man, I did it again. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah. Understand. Yeah. Totally aligned. Previously, we had a conversation about cost, speed, quality, right? How those are fundamentally a trade-off, right? And of course, we know there's plenty of executives who are like, I want all three, no exceptions. But fundamentally, there is a trade-off, right, in manufacturing, and
Yep.
and just as it relates to your business specifically, and your experiences specifically, right? How do you manage that trade-off? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah.
And you could say, you know, quality might be the component. Maybe it's that's substituted by inventory, and you know, customer service
Yep.
is speed, right? But fundamentally, there are those trade-offs. How do
Yeah.
you know, what's your experience in balancing those, and creating visibility to the trade-off itself?
Yeah.
And you know, where do you see that oftentimes going wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step and the mistake that's commonly made, because I've made it myself, I've got the lashes on my back to prove it, is failure to quantify what would be needed, sacrificed in one to get the other, and then what the benefit would be on the back half. Most executives that I've had the experience and privilege to deal with usually have a decent head on their shoulders. They're demanding, but if you're able to quantify, you know, hey, look, if I have an executive that's saying, hey, look, Sean, I we are not fast enough with this, right? We need to cut that lead time by at least a week. And right now, you know, it's where I don't want to sacrifice quality and I don't want to pay a bunch of money. To which I would have to say, okay, great. Well, let me, as a great friend of mine once told me, the phrase he always used was, okay, great. What must be true to make that happen? And what I would do is quantify, okay, look, I hear what you're saying. To cut lead times by this amount, this is your pacing operation. I would have to
Right.
cut that operation by this much, which would mean I would have to either invest in additional labor, additional machinery, additional capability, what have you, or I would have to figure out a way to make that process unnecessary, or you know, that type of a thing. But just paint out all those scenarios with the quantifications of each component. But what I always used to try tie in would be, you want better speed? Okay, great. Yes, here's the investment. Now let me just ask of my sales colleagues, how much more business would we get if I had that speed? What's your estimate? Are we talking a few more $1 million a year if I was able to do this in 1 week instead of two? Okay, great. Well, boss, seems like 20 grand well spent to me, right?
Yeah.
If I
Yeah.
can do that with this investment. What's often thrown out there and what I try to caution people against is just to bring up, to run into the wall, fall down on your behind, and then point to the wall saying it's a wall,
Yeah.
right? What do you want me to do? It can't be done, like whatever.
Right.
Well,
Right.
no, it can't be done under our current methods. Obviously, if it could, we would do it. What would it take? Quantify, be thoughtful about it. If I want faster speed, maintain quality, and not a whole lot more cost, how do I best do that with the least cost possible and make that pitch? And the part I like I said, I always wanted to intertwine was, remember, boss, the benefit of this was we said we could get like 10 million more in business if we did this. Well, I just need a $50,000 investment to get that multiple $1 million. I mean, is that not a good ROI? You got to learn to make the case. You can't just say it can't be done, or I would need a bajillion dollars in investment or whatever. Most executives, once you hit the balance, will be okay with it. I'm not going to say all, because I have worked for some characters. We all have, right? But for the most part, if you can give them that case and it's hard to deny, usually they'll say, okay, well, at least I'll think about it. Like, okay, fair
Mm.
enough. You know, versus just dismissing it outright. But a lot of people really jump to, well, that can't be done, that's impossible, blah, 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 without making the case of the trade-off,
Right.
right? Now,
Yeah.
do I think leaders could help themselves by saying something along the lines of, hey, I need lead time cut in half. It could get me millions more in business. What is it going to take to do that? And here's the caveat, I don't want it to cost an arm and a leg. What can we do?
Right.
Frame it a little better. But we all work in the real world. Most people will just say, hey, look, I just want shorter lead times, man. You tell
Yeah.
me how I'm going to do that.
So I don't think you're alone in the world where people are saying, you know, speed is the primary, you know,
Yeah.
driver of disruption at the moment. Um, do you see that in just, you're bringing it up. You brought it up obviously as an example, but my next question was actually going to be kind of where did you see, brand management, marketing operations, your business kind of going within the next 5 to 10 years, right? And so
Yep.
you've got AI, deeper analytics, changing customer behavior, a lot of things that are moving parts where, you
Yep.
can talk to multiple futurists and they'll have all sorts of either, you know, big innovations that are going to come or they're doomsday or somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
Where do you see that going? And, is there a trend that's emerging in your mind's eye around, kind of this business and is, to what degree is
Yeah.
speed part of it and to what degree is often complexity part of it, right? Now I'm
Yeah.
offering more, right? But we know things like businesses like Amazon have grown off of being able to disrupt, substantially disrupt a retail model. Now
Absolutely.
what's next for you guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more and more we go towards, it's sort of a two-part answer. Yes, speed, but it's speed in the form of quicker feedback loops, of being able to customize and adapt to beta testing in the field and things like that. So if I'm a marketer for a brand, as things change so fast now that I need the ability to be able to customize quickly. Where, hey, look, it seems like this message was effective. How do I get this changed so that I can get a bunch of apparel into the field and a bunch of ad campaigns out there and whatever?
Mm,
So that creative process needs to be a very short feedback loop. It's no longer a a guy pitching you over the phone. Hey, here's what my brand wants to do. Go
mm,
come up with a pitch for me with your madmen, and come back with a pitch for me. It's now, hey, look, I saw this work. Here's what I want to do. How do I make this happen like right now? And that's where,
mm,
for one touch point, the advantage to the continued investment that we are putting into the front end process of enabling a customer to literally basically design their own branding managed through one platform where we give them the software and all that type of stuff that's connected to, okay, now I've changed my message. I don't want to flood the market with it yet. I want to test it in a couple places. So I want to put in a short run of 10 pieces to go to these stores
right.
on this thing I just customized. Current state, and we're getting better at it. It's, it's always clunkier than it could be, right? So the legacy model was you would submit us a conceptual design. And if you wanted to change it, we would have to change out models and templates and printing plates and all this other stuff. Where nowadays, what they're expecting is, no, I just want to change it. I want to change this one thing, and I want you to keep running it as is. And I don't want to have to go through a big process and hullabaloo to get that done. I just want, you know,
Yeah.
I was in this store the other day, and people were raving about this display. I want to change mine to be a little bit more like that, to where it's more eye catching, but I want it in the field like tomorrow, instead of, hey, let's get together and get the design people to start brainstorming on this and whatever. So I
Right.
think it's a lot more quick feedback loop of, as we see things beta tested on the ground, changing them immediately from the customer perspective and getting them circulated out fast, instead
Right.
of going through an entire, project quote process that'll take months and that type of thing.
So,
It's that
so part of that,
reactive, quick.
yeah, and recognizing that it's actually effective is a whole other set of data as well, right? That now you've got
Yep.
to be able to say, hey, how do I test this? How am I, continuously doing, that statistical analysis to be able to say, hey, this appears to be
Yep.
catching on, right? And not having to test each thing, one by one. And that
Yeah.
analysis has improved, right? So there's more data to suggest that um, uh, obviously those changes can occur. Now you need to act on them. What
Yep.
about 25 years from now, right? Where do you see this going? You're kind of saying, speed to react to changing consumer behavior is a
Yep.
critical one for the next 5 to 10 years. Is
Yes.
is that the same trend? out 25 years, or do you see, more, specific consumer customization, right? So instead of
Hmm.
saying, hey, we're gonna, we've got a certain, WASP democratic WASP demographic that I'm going after.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna really tighten it in, and I'm gonna go after Hank, right? Or,
Yeah.
a specific, the personalization component. Where do you think this is all going?
Yeah. I think it's going to continue to go that direction, but it's even more dramatic. I think the future state, in my view, as I kind of see the way that everybody's gravitating, not just branding and marketing, but everything is going to turn more towards immediate digital, um, you know, branding and marketing in the form of you would have some form of technology that could just display, and it's literally, hey, I need somebody to just configure a new ad for me, and it's just going to pop up on that display, where you
Right.
wouldn't have
Right.
like end cap stuff and the things that we have today, or your sort of cardboard displays for liquor and stuff like that are out there when you go to the liquor store. It's going to be more of a, hey, look, that's all stuff that takes weeks to order and get into stock. I need something for a market change that is going to be available to me the minute I push a button. I want to launch this tomorrow. I'm
Yeah.
getting good intel, and I want something that I can just digitally, instead of buying a bunch of print, I want something digitally that's just going to display in my store tomorrow morning where everybody can see
So,
it.
so in theory, and I'm not saying this is ever anything that I would support or would happen, right? But in theory, if I walk into a store, it'll do a facial recognition scan and say that's Hank Ackerman. Um, if I'm in the ABC store, which they have in North Carolina,
Yeah.
and it says, Hank, we've seen him before. He buys a lot of bourbon and he buys a lot of
Yep.
gin, right? We'll flash up, hey, Hank, we've got this new bourbon. There's a special on for this there on that display. Are we going that
Yep.
far in 25 years?
I think maybe you won't be 100% there, but I think you're going in that direction. Now, like you, I give my cautions. I don't like it. Whether I like it or not is almost immaterial, right? Because it's happening today at a smaller scale, right? Everything you do is already, look at your Facebook feed, look at your Gmail address, the things that come through. You're already being monitored, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And
Yeah.
if we continue down that path, which I don't believe is changing anytime soon, I don't see any evidence of it. It just seems like we're kind of going further and further down that uh, path. I do think you're going to be, from a spend habit standpoint, store to store, whether it be facial recognition, whether it be literally just through your general purchasing. Every time you use your card or whatever in that store, they're monitoring your purchases. And okay, look, we know that Hank really digs bourbon and he really likes the high end stuff. So let's see if we can beta test getting some even higher end stuff in here to see if we bite on it, right? If we got enough people that fit that profile, I can bring in stuff top shelf stuff I wouldn't usually bring in because I didn't think there was a market for it. But this guy buys the toppest shelf we have every time he comes in the door. And so does this gal and this guy and this, whatever. So I do think it's getting to that. And I don't see it slowing down without some sort of legislation, which I don't see in the cards.
Right.
From a political standpoint, we're too divided as a nation to agree on that 100%
Yeah.
to get the horsepower.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's where the
but
money is, right? At the end of the day. I mean,
100%, that is where the
that's
profit is. And again, we're capitalists at the end of the day. We
yeah.
need to keep it in check for the common good. I get it, but I do think it'll continue inching that way into perpetuity, and we'll find faster ways to do it than we have today.
Yeah.
Today, it's through loyalty cards at your local Barnes and Noble and all this other stuff. Now it's just going to turn into straight up monitoring of everything you buy
Right.
by,
Right.
by name.
Well, Sean, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a fascinating discussion. We've covered a lot of stuff, and it lived up to my expectations. So really, really happy to have you on, and hope maybe in the future we'll get you back on and talk about some other subjects. But thanks so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.